I walked into the private dining room and saw a pen placed perfectly beside a stack of papers, while a stranger in a suit opened his laptop like a prosecutor. My mother smiled, claiming this was just a family meeting for fairness, but I knew immediately it was a trap. I asked one simple question regarding how many people were in the room. That single query turned their ambush into a nightmare they would regret for the rest of their lives. My name is Talia Monroe, and if there is one thing life has taught me in 29 years, it is that a text message from an estranged mother asking for a peaceful lunch is never just about food. It is about leverage. The message had popped up on my screen at 10 in the morning, right in the middle of a code review for my remote job at Blue Hollow Systems. It was short, punctuated with a performative softness that made my stomach churn. "Come for lunch. Let's talk peacefully." It read, "No apology for the silence since Dad's funeral. No inquiry about how I was managing the grief that still felt like a bruised rib every time I took a deep breath. Just a summon disguised as an olive branch." I drove to Winter Park with a knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. For anyone living in Central Florida, Winter Park is the epitome of manicured wealth. It is all brick-paved streets, canopying oak trees with hanging Spanish moss, and boutiques where the price tags do not have cents on them. The restaurant my mother, Denise, had chosen was one of those places where the air conditioning is set to a temperature that requires a blazer, and the waiters speak in hushed, reverent tones. I gave my name at the host stand. The hostess did not reach for a menu. She did not ask if I preferred sparkling or still water. She just nodded, her face practicing a professional blankness, and led me past the lively main dining room. We walked past the clinking of wine glasses and the hum of polite conversation, straight to the back, toward a heavy mahogany door. When she opened it, the ambient noise of the restaurant died instantly. This was not a lunch. This was an ambush. The private room was small, windowless, and dominated by a long, polished table. There were no appetizers. There were no menus. There was not even a glass of water at the seat that had clearly been left empty for me. Instead, right in the center of the place setting where a plate should have been, there was a black fountain pen. Next to it sat a thick stack of legal-sized paper, held together by a binder clip, with my full legal name printed on the cover page in a bold, sans-serif font. I stopped in the doorway, my hand still gripping the brass handle. My mother, Denise, sat at the head of the table. She looked immaculate, of course. She was wearing a cream-colored silk blouse that probably cost more than my first car. Her hair coiffed into that ageless, stiff style she believed signaled authority. She smiled at me, but it did not reach her eyes. It was the same smile she used to give neighbors when she was trying to explain away the noise of my father packing his bags years ago. A smile that said, "Everything is fine, because I say it is." To her right sat Graham, her husband. He was leaning back in his chair, trying to look relaxed, but his fingers were drumming a rhythmic, impatient beat on the table. He wore a suit that was slightly too shiny, the kind worn by men who sell things they do not own. To her left were Kayla and Jordan, Graham's children, my step-siblings. They were both on their phones when I walked in, but they looked up with a synchronized sharpness. Kayla, who was 22, looked at me with a mixture of boredom and anticipation, like she was waiting for a reality show finale to start. Jordan just stared at the stack of papers in front of me, his eyes practically calculating the math. They were not here for family bonding. They were here to witness the kill. And then there was the stranger. A man I had never seen before sat at the far end of the table. He was older, balding, with wire-rimmed glasses and a laptop already open in front of him. He did not look up when I entered. He just kept typing, the click-clack of his keyboard the only sound in the room. "Have a seat, Talia," my mother said. Her voice was light, airy, completely at odds with the courtroom setup in front of us. "We have been waiting." I did not sit. I walked over to the chair, pulled it out, and stood behind it. "You said lunch." "Mom, I do not see any food." "We need to settle some business first," Graham said, his voice deep and feigned with a paternal concern that made my skin crawl. "Then we can celebrate." "Celebrate what?" I asked, my eyes flicking to the papers. The man with the laptop stopped typing. He cleared his throat and stood up. He was shorter than he looked while seated. Ms. Monroe, I am Harlan Crow. I am representing your mother and Mr. Graham in this matter regarding the estate of the late Marcus Monroe. I felt a cold spike of adrenaline. There is no matter regarding the estate, I said, keeping my voice steady. My father's will was clear. Everything has been probated. It is done. Probate is a fluid process, Mr. Harlan said, offering a tight, condescending smile, especially when the distribution of assets creates an inequitable burden on the surviving family unit. The family unit? I repeated. My father and Denise have been divorced for 12 years. There is no unit. Talia, please, my mother interrupted, gesturing gracefully to the papers. Don't be difficult. We are just trying to fix a mistake. Your father? He was not thinking clearly at the end. We all know that. He would not have wanted to leave his family struggling while you sat on all those assets alone. It is not fair. Honey, it is not Christian. I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the greed tucked into the corners of her mouth. She did not look like a grieving widow. She looked like a predator who had finally cornered her prey. What is this? I asked, pointing to the document. It is a family asset reallocation agreement, Mr. Harlan said smoothly. Essentially, it is a voluntary restructuring of the inheritance. It consolidates the assets, the townhouse, the investment accounts, the retirement funds, into a single-family trust. Managed by whom? I asked. Your mother, naturally, Harlan said, as the matriarch. And what is my share in this new arrangement? Harlan picked up a sheet of paper and slid it across the table. You would retain a 30% interest in the trust, distributed in monthly allowances over the next 20 years. The remaining 70% would be allocated to the general fund for the maintenance of the family estate and the support of your siblings. I felt the laugh bubble up in my throat, bitter and sharp. 70%. They wanted me to sign over 70% of everything my father had worked for, everything he had specifically saved to ensure I would never be dependent on people like them. 70%, I said aloud. You want me to give you nearly 3/4 of my inheritance. For what? For Kayla's tuition? For Graham's next failed business venture? Graham slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed in the small room. Show some respect. Talia, we are offering you a chance to do the right thing, to be part of this family. I am not signing that, I said. My voice was quiet, but it did not shake. I am not signing anything. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The fake warmth evaporated. My mother's smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold, hard calculation. If you do not sign, Mr. Harlan said, his tone dropping the professional veneer and becoming flat and menacing, we will be forced to contest the will. We have grounds: undue influence, mental incapacity. We can tie this estate up in litigation for 5, maybe 7 years. The legal fees alone will drain the accounts before you ever see a dime. And it is not just the money, my mother added, leaning forward. Her eyes were dark. We know you are looking to buy a house, Talia. We know about your credit standing, a protracted legal battle, putting a lis pendens on the properties. It would ruin your financial profile. You would be untouchable to lenders. You would be stuck in that apartment forever. We can make it very ugly, Graham said, or we can make it nice. You sign, you get a stipend, you stay family, you refuse, and we bury you in paper. Kayla and Jordan were snickering quietly. They thought it was over. They thought I was the scared little girl who used to hide in her room when Mom and Graham argued about credit card bills. They thought they had won before the game had even started. I looked down at the pen. It was a Mont Blanc. Expensive. Another prop in their theater of intimidation. I took a breath, inhaling the scent of expensive perfume and stale coffee. I thought about my dad. I thought about the nights he sat at his kitchen table, teaching me how to balance a checkbook, telling me that the only person responsible for my freedom was me. Paperwork doesn't lie. Talia, he used to say, people do. I reached into my purse. "What are you doing?" Graham demanded. I pulled out my phone. "I have a question." "The only question is whether you want the pen or not." Harlan sneered. I looked up, meeting my mother's gaze. "In this room," I said slowly. "How many people are there?" My mother frowned. "What? Are you on drugs? There are 6 of us." "6," I repeated. "You, Graham, Kayla, Jordan, Mr. Harlan, and me." I unlocked my phone. I had a message typed out in my drafts folder. I had written it 2 days ago. The moment Nora, my father's real attorney, had warned me this might happen, I had hoped I wouldn't need to send it. I had hoped my mother had a shred of decency left, but hope is not a strategy. I opened the message. It was addressed to a single contact. 6 people, I said again. "That is a lot of witnesses." "Witnesses to what?" Graham asked, his voice rising. "To the end of your leverage," I said. I pressed send. I placed the phone face down on the table, right next to the insulting contract. I did not look at the papers. I looked at the door. "What did you do?" Denise asked. Her voice wavered for the first time. "I invited a 7th," I said. The room fell silent. Graham looked at the door. Harlan stopped tapping his foot. And then, just as the silence became unbearable, there was a sharp, confident knock on the door. 3 distinct knocks. My mother flinched. I smiled, and for the first time that afternoon, it was genuine. "Lunch is served." To understand why I was the only person in that private dining room who was not sweating, you have to understand the house I grew up in. It was a modest bungalow in St. Petersburg, Florida, just a few miles from the water, but a world away from the yacht clubs, while the other kids were learning how to sail or play tennis. I was learning how to balance a ledger on a kitchen table that had a permanent wobble in one leg. My father, Marcus, was a man of quiet, terrifying precision. He was not cold, but he was careful. He worked in logistics for 30 years, ensuring that shipping containers got from point A to point B without a single ounce of wasted fuel or time. He applied that same rigorous logic to our lives. On Sunday nights, while other families were watching football or arguing over what to order for dinner, Dad would open a thick leather-bound notebook. He would call me over, pull out a calculator, and show me the math of survival. He taught me that debt was not just a number, it was a leash. He taught me that interest rates were how the patient people ate the impatient people. But mostly, he taught me the lesson that had just saved me in that restaurant. Paperwork does not have feelings, and paperwork does not lie. People can cry, people can scream, people can promise you the moon, but a signed document is the only truth that holds up when the storm hits. My mother, Denise, was the storm. If Dad was the anchor, Mom was the hurricane seeking a coastline to destroy. She was beautiful in a frantic, high-maintenance way. To Denise, life was a performance art piece, and the audience was always watching. She did not want a home. She wanted a venue. She did not want friends. She wanted admirers. She was obsessed with the idea of an upgrade. She wanted the bigger car, the country club membership, the vacations that looked good on social media, even if we were eating instant noodles for a month afterward to pay for them. The divorce happened when I was 12 years old, and it was not over an affair. It was over a second mortgage. Denise had forged Dad's signature to renovate a kitchen that was perfectly functional, because she had read in a magazine that granite countertops were the mark of the civilized class. When Dad found out, he did not yell. He just went very quiet. He looked at the bank statement, looked at the half-demolished kitchen, and then looked at her. He packed his bags that night. He realized that he could budget for a disaster, but he could not budget for a partner who was actively sabotaging the hull of the ship. I chose to live with Dad. It was not a hard choice. Though Denise cried and told everyone who would listen that Marcus had brainwashed me, the truth was simpler. I felt safe with him, with Mom. I always felt like a prop in a play I had not rehearsed for. Over the next decade, while I went to college and started my career in tech, I watched from a distance as Denise built her new, shiny life. She married Graham 2 years after the divorce. Graham was a commercial real estate agent who always smelled of expensive cologne and desperation. Together, they were perfect. They bought a McMansion in a gated community that they could barely afford. They had Kayla and Jordan, my half-siblings, and raised them to be just as image-obsessed as they were. I became the ghost in their family portrait. I was the reminder of the time before the money, the relic of the modest life Denise wanted to scrub from her history. I was only invited over when they needed something to round out the numbers. Thanksgiving dinners where I was seated at the end of the table. Christmas parties where I was expected to take the photos, not be in them. But the calls never stopped. That was the thing about Denise. She treated me like an outsider until the credit card bill came due. I remember a call I got when I was 24. I had just landed my first senior developer role. I was making good money, saving aggressive amounts just like Dad taught me. Denise called me on a Tuesday night. Her voice was thick with that manufactured sweetness she used when she wanted a favor. She told me Graham was having a temporary cash flow issue with a closing, and they needed $5,000 to cover the landscaping bill for the season. Not a mortgage payment, not medical bills, landscaping, because God forbid the neighbors saw a brown patch on their lawn. When I said no, the sweetness curdled instantly. She told me I was ungrateful. She told me I had no idea how much she sacrificed to raise me. She told me I was cold, just like my father. I hung up and stared at the wall for an hour, feeling that old, familiar guilt gnawing at my stomach. Dad found out about the call. He sat me down on his porch, handed me a beer, and said the words that became my armor. He looked me in the eye and said that I did not owe my future to anyone. He said that family is supposed to be the people who help you build your life, not the people who strip it for parts. He began preparing then. I did not know the extent of it at the time. I just knew he was meeting with lawyers, moving assets, setting up trusts. He was secretive about it, which was unlike him. He would just tap the side of his nose and say that he was making sure the vultures would starve. He knew Denise better than I did. He knew that as long as he was alive, he was the dam holding back her greed. But he also knew that dams eventually break. Then came the accident. It was a rainy Tuesday in November. Dad was driving back from a hardware store. A delivery truck ran a red light. It was over in an instant. The grief was a physical weight, heavy and suffocating. I felt like the gravity had been turned up on the entire world. But while I was trying to remember how to breathe, Denise was trying to figure out how to unlock his safe. She showed up at the funeral wearing black lace and sobbing louder than anyone else, clinging to Graham's arm as if she were the one who had lost a partner. She accepted condolences for a man she had called a bore and a miser for 20 years. I stood by the grave, dry-eyed and numb, watching her perform. I saw the way her eyes darted around the crowd, assessing who was there, calculating the social capital of the event. 2 days after the funeral, before the dirt had even settled, she sent me a text. She did not ask how I was sleeping. She did not ask if I needed help sorting through his things. She asked if I had found the life insurance policy yet. That was the moment the sadness turned into something else. It turned into cold, hard clarity. I went to Dad's house that afternoon. I walked through the quiet rooms, smelling his aftershave and the dust of old books. I found his filing cabinet. It was locked, but I knew where the key was, taped under the third drawer of his workbench in the garage. Inside, everything was organized in color-coded folders, but right on top, there was a heavy manila envelope with my name on it in his blocky handwriting. Inside was a letter, and a contact card for a woman named Nora Vance. The letter was short. It said that if I was reading this, he was gone, and the hunt had begun. He told me that Denise would come for everything. He told me that Graham was leveraged to the hilt, and that their lifestyle was a house of cards waiting for a strong wind. He told me that I was their bailout plan. And then, at the bottom of the page, he wrote something that made my blood run cold. He wrote that he had not just left me money. He had left me a weapon. I realized then that my father had not just been a logistics manager. He had been a strategist. He had spent the last 5 years of his life constructing a fortress around me. brick by legal brick, because he knew exactly what would happen the moment his heart stopped beating. So when Denise texted me to come to lunch at that restaurant in Winter Park, I did not go as a daughter hoping for reconciliation. I did not go as a victim. I went as the executor of Marcus Monroe's final will and testament. I went because I knew exactly what they wanted, and I knew exactly what they were going to do. I had spent my childhood watching my mother manipulate reality to suit her narrative. I had spent my adulthood watching my father use paper to build a reality that could not be manipulated. As I sat in my car in the parking lot of the restaurant, checking my makeup in the rearview mirror before walking into the ambush, I thought about the fear I used to feel when she raised her voice. I realized I did not feel it anymore. All I felt was the cool, detached focus of a technician looking at a broken system. I knew why she wanted the meeting. The 7 years of statute of limitations on certain claims were tricky. The probate window was closing. Graham's business was likely failing again. They needed cash, and they needed it fast. They looked at me and saw a lonely, grieving girl who would pay any price to be loved. They had no idea that the girl had died with her father. The woman who walked into that room was done paying for things she did not buy. I checked my phone one last time. I saw the signal strength was full. I touched the contact for Nora Vance, just to make sure it was ready. Then I stepped out of the car and walked toward the restaurant, ready to see just how low they were willing to go. I had grown up thinking family was a safety net. Now I knew that for some people, family is just the most effective way to get close enough to twist the knife. I was ready for the knife. I just hoped they were ready for the shield. The weeks following my father's death were a blur of administrative grayness punctuated by sharp, stabbing moments of realization that he was truly gone. When you lose the person who taught you how to navigate the world suddenly feels like a map written in a language you do not speak. I felt unmoored, drifting in a house that was too quiet, waiting for the sound of his key in the lock that would never come. The funeral was exactly what Marcus Monroe would have wanted. It was held in a small, non-denominational chapel near the coast, with the windows open so you could smell the salt air. There were no elaborate flower arrangements that cost a fortune and died in 2 days. Instead, there were photos of him fishing, grilling on the patio, and working in his garden. The people who came were his bowling league friends, his old colleagues from the logistics firm, and neighbors who remembered how he always loaned out his pressure washer without asking for it back. It was warm, respectful, and genuine. And then there was Denise. My mother arrived 20 minutes late, ensuring that every head turned to watch her entrance. She was dressed in black, but it was not the mourning black of a grieving ex-wife. It was the cinematic black of a starlet playing a widow. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and oversized sunglasses. Clutching a handkerchief, she made sure to dab at dry eyes whenever anyone looked her way. Graham trailed behind her, looking uncomfortable and checking his watch, while Kayla and Jordan stood awkwardly by the entrance, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. Denise spent the service sighing loudly and whispering to people she barely knew about how tragic it was, how much they had shared, rewriting history in real time. She tried to hold my hand during the eulogy, but I kept my arms crossed tight against my chest. I watched her perform grief like it was a monologue she had rehearsed in front of a mirror. It made my stomach turn, but I did not make a scene. That was what she wanted. After the service, as the crowd thinned out and I stood by the table of refreshments, a woman approached me. She was tall, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and a tailored navy suit that looked like armor. She carried a leather briefcase that looked well worn. "Talia," she said. It was not a question. Her voice was low and steady, cutting through the murmurs of the room. "I am Nora Vance. I was your father's attorney for the last 7 years." I shook her hand. Her grip was firm. "I found your card in his desk." "We need to talk," Nora said. "Not here, but soon. Your father left specific instructions to meet within 48 hours of the service." We met the next morning at her office downtown. It was a space that smelled of lemon polish and old paper. Nora sat behind a large oak desk and opened a file that was 3 inches thick. "Your father was a meticulous man," Nora began, opening the folder. He knew that his estate would be a point of contention. He spent years structuring this so that it would be as unassailable as possible. She slid a summary sheet across the desk toward me. I looked at the numbers, and my breath caught in my throat. It was not a fortune in the way billionaires count money, but for a man who drove a 6-year-old truck and packed his own lunch, it was staggering. There was the townhouse in St. Petersburg, fully paid off. There was a diversified investment portfolio he had been contributing to since the 80s. There were government bonds. And then there was the surprise, a significant amount of preferred stock from a logistics company he had helped found in his 30s before they went public. He had never sold it. He had just let it sit there, compounding quietly in the dark. The total valuation, Nora said, tapping the bottom line, puts you in a position of complete financial independence. You could pay cash for a home. You could go back to school. You could do whatever you want. I stared at the number. It looked like freedom. It looked like safety. However, Nora continued, her tone sharpening, this is where it gets complicated. Not legally, but socially. Your father was very clear that all of these assets were acquired and maintained as separate property after the divorce. The deed to the townhouse is in his name only. The accounts were never commingled with Denise. The beneficiaries are updated and explicit. You are the sole beneficiary of the estate. There are no other claimants. That sounds simple, I said. It is legally simple, Nora corrected. But simple does not mean quiet. Your mother and her husband are not mentioned in the will, not a single cent. And given what Marcus told me about their financial situation, they are going to view this not as a legal reality, but as a personal attack. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. Talia, listen to me closely. This portfolio is shielded. We have trust structures in place, but the one thing I cannot protect you from is your own guilt. They will come at you. They will try to make you feel like you are stealing from them. They will use the words fairness and family as weapons. As if summoned by her words. My phone buzzed on the desk. I looked down. It was a text from Denise. I picked it up. There were no condolences. No how are you holding up, sweetie? No offer to bring over a casserole. The message was just 5 words. Do we have an estimate? I felt a cold flush of anger rise up my neck. My father had been in the ground for less than 24 hours. She just texted me, I told Nora. She wants to know how much it is. Nora did not look surprised. Do not answer. In fact, that brings me to the rules of engagement. She opened a drawer and pulled out a fresh notepad. Rule number 1. You do not discuss numbers, not a ballpark, not a hint. To them, this money is abstract until you give it a number. Once you give it a number, it becomes real, and they will spend it in their heads before they even touch it. Rule number 2, she continued. You sign nothing. If they put a piece of paper in front of you, a card, a letter, a waiver, anything, you put your hands in your pockets. If they ask for a signature for a delivery, you read the label first. And rule number 3, Nora said, closing the file with a heavy thud. You do not meet them alone. Isolation is how manipulation works. They need you to be the little girl who wants approval. They cannot run that play if there is a witness in the room. I nodded, absorbing the strategy. It felt less like probate and more like preparing for a siege. Over the next week, the pressure began to mount just as Nora had predicted. It started small. Denise called me the next day, her voice dripping with that fake syrup. She talked about how hard it was for Graham, how the market was tough, how they were thinking of downsizing, but it would be so hard on the kids. She was fishing. She was casting lines into the dark water, waiting for me to bite and say, Don't worry, Mom, I can help. I did not bite. Instead, I did what Dad had taught me. I started a log. I opened a spreadsheet on my laptop. Every time Denise or Graham called, I logged the time and date. I transcribed voicemails. I took screenshots of text messages. Tuesday, 9 a.m. Denise asks if Dad had life insurance. Wednesday, 2 p.m. Graham texts asking if I have access to the safe deposit box keys. Thursday, 7 p.m. Denise leaves a voicemail crying about how expensive college tuition is for Kayla. Dad used to say, "Greedy people always leave tracks because they are too busy looking at the prize to look at their feet." He was right. Looking at the log, the pattern was undeniable. They were desperate. They were probing for weaknesses. And the fact that I was not giving them any information was driving them crazy. Then came the shift. About 10 days after the funeral, the tone changed. The wheedling stops, and the demands began. Graham sent me an email, not a text. An email claiming that there were outstanding debts Dad owed him from a vague consultation years ago. He attached an invoice that looked like it had been typed up in 5 minutes on Microsoft Word. The date on the invoice was from 4 years ago. I forwarded it to Nora. She replied in 3 minutes. "Ignore it. It is bait. They are trying to establish a creditor relationship." When that didn't work, Denise played her ace. She texted me on a Monday morning. "We need to talk. All of us. We are worried about you. Talia, you seem distant. Graham and I think we need a family meeting to clear the air and make sure everything is being handled fairly. Let's do lunch. My treat." I stared at the screen. Fairly. That was the word Nora had warned me about. I knew what this was. They realized they couldn't get to the money through guilt alone, so now they were going to try to bully me into it. They wanted to get me in a room, outnumbered, outflanked, and pressure me until I cracked. My first instinct was to say no, to block the number and disappear into my new life. But then I looked at the log I had been keeping. I looked at the invoice Graham had faked. I thought about the way Denise had looked at the funeral, checking the crowd for an audience. If I ran now, they would chase me forever. They would sue. They would slander. They would drag this out for years, just like Dad had feared. The only way to stop a bully is not to run away. It is to hit back so hard they lose the will to fight. I picked up the phone and called Nora. "They want a meeting," I said. "Do not go," Nora replied instantly. "I am going," I said, "but I am not going to negotiate." "Talia, that is dangerous. They will have a plan." "I know," I said. "I am counting on it. I want them to put their plan on the table. I want them to show me exactly who they are so I never have to wonder again, but I am not going alone." There was a pause on the line. I could hear Nora tapping her pen against her desk. "If you go," she said slowly, "you need to be prepared for them to try and strip you bare. They will have paperwork. They might even have a lawyer." "Let them bring a lawyer," I said, feeling a cold calm settle over me. "I am bringing the truth." "Okay," Nora said. "Then we do this on our terms. You go in, you let them talk, you let them dig the hole, and when they are deep enough, you signal me." "I will text you," I said. I hung up the phone and typed out a reply to Denise. "Sure, lunch sounds good. Send me the details." I put the phone down and looked around my apartment. It was small. It was rented. But it was mine. And soon, thanks to Marcus Monroe, I would have a foundation that no one could shake. I walked over to the closet and pulled out the dress I would wear. I chose something sharp, professional. I was not going to a family reunion. I was going to a closing. I did not know exactly what they would have waiting for me in that private room in Winter Park. I did not know about the asset reallocation agreement or the percentages they had dreamt up, but I knew one thing for certain. They expected a daughter to walk through that door. They were about to meet the executor. The 3 knocks on the door were precise, authoritative, and shattered the stifling tension in the room like a hammer hitting glass. Before anyone at the table could react, the door swung open. Nora Vance stepped inside. She did not look like she was crashing a family lunch. She looked like she was arriving at a deposition she had already won. She wore the same sharp navy suit from our first meeting, her leather briefcase in hand, and her expression was one of polite, lethal curiosity. She didn't look at me. She looked directly at the man at the end of the table. "Mr. Harlan," Nora said, her voice smooth and cool. "I was not aware you were practicing probate law these days. Last I checked. Your firm specialized in personal injury and traffic violations." The effect was instantaneous. The lawyer, Mr. Harlan, practically jumped in his seat. He snapped his laptop shut, as if he had been caught watching something illicit. Ms. Vance, I wasn't aware you were representing the decedent's estate. There is a lot you do not seem to be aware of, Nora said, walking over to the table. She pulled out the empty chair next to me, the one they had intended for isolation, and sat down. She placed her briefcase on the table, the heavy thud sounding like a gavel. My mother recovered from her shock first. Though the mask slipped, the wounded doe look evaporated, replaced by a flash of genuine irritation. Talia, Denise snapped, turning to me, why did you bring a lawyer? This is a private family matter. We are trying to have a nice lunch, and you are turning it into a federal case. Why do you always have to be so dramatic? Dramatic? I repeated, keeping my voice level. You put a legal contract in front of me before I even got a glass of water. Mom, that is not lunch. That is business. And since it is business, I brought my advisor. It is not a contract. It is an agreement, Graham interjected, trying to regain control. He flashed a smile that showed too many teeth. Ms. Vance, surely you can see that we are just trying to correct an oversight. Marcus, well, Marcus was not in his right mind at the end. We just want to ensure the family is taken care of. Nora ignored him completely. She reached out and picked up the stack of papers lying next to the expensive pen. She flipped through them with the speed of someone who reads legalese as a first language. The silence in the room was thick. Harlan was wiping sweat from his forehead. Kayla and Jordan were exchanging nervous glances, sensing that the power dynamic had just violently shifted. This is fascinating, Nora said after a moment, not looking up. She flipped another page. Mr. Harlan, did you draft this? I advised on the language, Harlan stammered. Who instructed you? Nora asked. She looked up then, her eyes hard. Because looking at Article 4, Section 2, this creates an irrevocable trust, meaning once Talia signs this, she cannot unsign it. She cannot access the principal. She cannot even petition for a trustee change without the unanimous consent of the beneficiary committee. Nora turned the page and pointed a manicured finger at a paragraph. And the beneficiary committee consists of, let me see here, Denise Kincaid and Graham Kincaid. Interesting. She looked at my mother. So, let me get this straight. You want Talia to voluntarily sign over 70% of her father's assets into a fund that you control, that you can draw from for administrative expenses without limit, and she has zero recourse to stop you? It is for the whole family, Denise cried out, her voice rising an octave. It is a general fund, for emergencies, for the future. And who is the primary beneficiary of this fund? Nora asked, flipping to the back page. Here it is, the surviving family unit, defined as Denise, Graham, Kayla, and Jordan. Nora dropped the packet back onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right in front of Graham. This is not an agreement, Nora said, her voice dripping with disdain. This is theft with a signature line. Graham's face turned a blotchy shade of red. Now wait a minute. You cannot come in here and accuse us of… I can… Nora cut him off. And I will… Mr. Harlan, you know as well as I do that presenting this document to a grieving heir under the guise of a social gathering, without advising them to seek independent counsel, borders on an ethics violation. Do you want me to forward this to the Bar Association? Or should we just pretend this lunch never happened? Harlan looked like he wanted to vanish into the upholstery. I was assured that all parties were in agreement prior to the meeting, he mumbled, looking at Graham with accusation. Graham slammed his hand on the table again, but it lacked the authority it had 10 minutes ago. We are trying to protect the children, he shouted, gesturing to Kayla and Jordan. Talia doesn't need all that money. She is single. She has a job. These kids have college coming up. They have futures. Marcus would have wanted to help them. I looked at Kayla and Jordan. They weren't children. Kayla was 22, wearing a designer watch. Jordan was 19, driving a car my father would never have bought for himself. They weren't starving. They were just accustomed to a lifestyle that Graham and Denise could no longer afford. That is enough, I said. I stood up. The The chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound that made everyone jump. "Graham," I said, looking him in the eye. "My father worked for 30 years. He drove a truck with a broken air conditioner so he could max out his retirement contributions. He wore the same 3 suits for a decade. He didn't do that so you could pay off your bad investments. He didn't do that so Kayla could go to a private art school she is failing out of." "How dare you?" Denise hissed. "No, Mom, how dare you?" I replied. "You walked out on him. You told him he was boring. You told him he was cheap. You divorced him because he wouldn't leverage the house to buy you a lifestyle you didn't earn. And now that he is gone, you want the very thing you mocked him for saving." I placed my hand on the table, leaning forward. "This estate is not a pie to be divided. It is not a community chest. It is my father's final choice. It is his legacy, and it is not up for a vote." The room went deadly silent. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the service station down the hall. Denise stared at me, her chest heaving. The mask was gone completely now. There was no mother left in her eyes, only a desperate, angry woman who realized she was losing. "You are a selfish little brat," she spat. The venom in her voice was shocking, even to me. "Just like him, cold, heartless. You think you can just walk away with everything? We will sue you. We will contest every single account. I will tell everyone what you did. I will tell the family you stole from your siblings." She stood up, shaking a finger at me. "And do not think your credit is safe. I know your history. Talia, I know where you bank. I know your social security number. It is very easy for things to get messy. Identity theft happens all the time. By the time we are done with you, no bank will touch you for 20 years. It was a direct threat, a criminal threat. Nora stood up slowly. She didn't shout. She didn't look angry. She looked like a predator who had just watched a rabbit walk into a trap. "Mrs. Kincaid," Nora said, her voice dropping to a register that was terrifyingly calm. "I am glad you said that." Denise blinked. "What?" I said, "I am glad you said that." Nora repeated, "Because in the state of Florida, extortion is a felony, and threatening to commit fraud using personal identifying information is also a felony." Sst. Nora tapped her briefcase. "From this moment forward, any communication between you and my client will be done through my office. If you text her, I will file it. If you call her, I will record it. And if I see so much as a single inquiry on her credit report that she did not authorize, I will not just sue you. I will file a police report for identity theft, and I will name every person in this room as a co-conspirator." She looked at Harlan. "And you, counselor, are a witness to your client's threat. Unless you want to be deposed as a co-defendant, I suggest you advise them to stop talking immediately." Harlan looked terrified. He started packing his laptop with frantic, jerky movements. I think we are done here," he muttered. "Denise, Graham, we should go." "We are not going anywhere until she signs," Denise screamed, grabbing the pen. "It is over, Denise," Graham said, his voice hollow. He grabbed her arm. He was smarter than her, or at least more cowardly. He saw the legal precipice they were standing on. "Let's go. We will figure something else out." "Get off me!" Denise pulled her arm away. She looked at me one last time. There were tears in her eyes now, but they were tears of rage, not sorrow. "I hope you enjoy it. Talia, I hope that money keeps you warm at night, because you have no family left. You are an orphan now, for real." "I have been an orphan for a long time, Mom," I said softly. "I just finally stopped pretending I wasn't." She stared at me for a second longer, searching for a crack, a sign of weakness she could exploit. Finding none, she grabbed her purse. She didn't look at Kayla or Jordan. She just turned and marched out the door, her heels clicking angrily on the hardwood floor. Graham followed her, shooting a glare at Nora but saying nothing. Harlan practically ran out behind them, clutching his briefcase to his chest. Kayla and Jordan lingered for a second. Kayla looked at me, and for a moment, I thought she might say something human. maybe apologize, but she just rolled her eyes, scoffed, and followed her parents. The door swung shut, leaving Nora and me alone in the quiet room. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for an hour. My legs felt shaky, the adrenaline beginning to crash. I sank back into my chair. "You did good," Nora said. She reached over and picked up the asset reallocation agreement. She ripped it in half, then in half again, the sound sharp and satisfying. "You held the line." "She threatened to ruin me," I said, staring at the torn paper. "She threatened to use my information." "She is desperate," Nora said. "People say stupid things when they are cornered." "No," I said, shaking my head. I thought about the look in Denise's eyes. It wasn't just anger, it was calculation. She had pivoted from emotional manipulation to financial threats in the span of a heartbeat. She wasn't just saying it, she meant it. She knows my history. She knows everything about me. I looked at Nora. "She left because you scared her with the legal threat, but she didn't leave because she gave up. She went quiet." Nora's expression sobered. She nodded slowly. "You are right. Silence from a narcissist isn't peace. It is plotting." "She is going to change tactics," I said, feeling a new kind of cold settle in my stomach. "She couldn't get me to sign the money over, so now she is going to try to take it." "Then we prepare for that," Nora said. "But for today, you won. You walked into the trap, and you broke it." I looked at the empty table, at the fountain pen Denise had left behind in her rage. I picked it up. It was heavy, expensive, and utterly useless without a hand to guide it. "I didn't win," I whispered. "I just survived the opening shot." I didn't know then how right I was. I thought the worst part was seeing my mother's greed face to face. I didn't know that the real war was about to move from a private dining room to the digital shadows, where lawyers couldn't always protect you. But as I walked out of that restaurant into the blinding Florida sun, I knew one thing. The family meeting was over. The siege had begun. The silence that followed my departure from the restaurant was not the silence of peace. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of a receding tide before a tsunami. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 10 minutes, just breathing, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I expected a phone call. I expected Graham to come banging on my window. I expected my mother to run out screaming. But nothing happened. The restaurant door remained closed. The world kept moving. Then, my phone vibrated against the center console. It was a single text message from Denise. "You will regret making this hard." It was not a plea. It was not an emotional outburst. It was a statement of fact, cold and binary. I drove straight to Nora's office. I did not want to go home yet. My apartment felt exposed, a glass box that they could see into. When I showed Nora the text, she did not look surprised. She adjusted her glasses and looked at me with a seriousness that chilled my blood. "Talia," she said, "you need to understand what just happened. You took away their narrative. You refused to play the role of the obedient daughter. When you cannot manipulate a person emotionally, you stop trying to persuade them. You start trying to dismantle them." "Dismantle me?" I asked. "You mean sue me?" "I mean they know your buttons are not working anymore," Nora said. "So they are going to look for other ways to get in. They are going to pivot from emotional extortion to data intrusion. They know your full name. They know your date of birth. They know your social security number because they claimed you as a dependent for 18 years. In the modern world, that is the keys to the castle." She handed me a sheet of paper. It was a checklist. "Go home," she instructed. "Do not sleep until every item on this list is done. We are locking the gates." I spent the next 6 hours waging a silent, digital war from my living room couch. It was the most exhausting thing I have ever done. I logged into every single account I owned: Bank of America, Chase, my investment portfolio, my email, my social media. I changed every password. I did not just change them. I generated random strings of 20 characters that even I could not memorize. I turned on two-factor authentication for everything, linking it to an authenticator app rather than my phone number, just in case they tried to SIM swap me. Then came the credit bureaus. I went to Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. I froze my credit reports. It felt like I was boarding up windows before a hurricane. But the most terrifying part was the security questions. I went to update the security questions for my primary checking account. The prompt asked, "What was the name of your first pet?" I froze. My first pet was a golden retriever named Buster. Denise bought him for me when I was 6. She knew that. The next prompt, "What is your mother's maiden name?" Obviously, she knew that. "What was the name of the street you grew up on?" She owned the house on that street. I realized with a sick, sinking feeling that the standard security protocols of the banking world were designed to protect you from strangers, not from your own parents. My mother held the master key to my identity just by virtue of having raised me. I started lying. I updated my security answers to nonsensical phrases that had nothing to do with the questions. My first pet was now Blue Toyota. My mother's maiden name was Jupiter. I wrote them down in a physical notebook that I hid inside my hollowed-out copy of Moby Dick. I thought I had been fast enough. I thought I was ahead of them. 2 days later, on a Thursday morning, I received an email. It appeared in my inbox with the red logo of my bank. The subject line was urgent. Action required. Unauthorized sign-in attempt detected. My heart hammered against my ribs. The email looked perfect. The font was right. The logo was high resolution. It said that someone had tried to access my account from a device in Atlanta, Georgia, and that I needed to click the link below to verify my identity and secure my funds. Panic is a physical reaction. It bypasses logic. My finger hovered over the link. I wanted to click it. I wanted to fix it. Atlanta? I didn't know anyone in Atlanta. But then, I heard my father's voice in my head. Paperwork doesn't lie. I hovered my mouse over the sender's address. It said, "Support, Banco Fame Elsa." Com. I blinked. I looked closer. It wasn't an I, it was a lowercase l, Banco Famerlka. The domain was one letter off. It was a spoof, a phishing attempt designed to look exactly like a panic-inducing security alert. I did not click the link. Instead, I flipped my debit card over and called the number printed on the back. My hands were shaking so badly I had to dial 3 times. "Security department," a woman answered after a 5-minute hold that felt like 5 years. "I just got an email," I said, my voice tight. "I want to know if there has been any actual activity on my account." There was the sound of typing. "Let me check for you. Ms. Monroe. One moment." The silence stretched. I watched a bird land on my balcony railing, oblivious to the fact that my life was being hunted. "Okay," the woman said, her tone shifting from bored to alert. "I am seeing 3 failed login attempts in the last hour. They failed because the password was incorrect. However—" "However what?" I demanded. "However, after the 3rd failure, the user attempted to initiate a password reset using the Forgot Password feature. They correctly answered 2 out of 3 security questions before the system locked them out." My stomach dropped to the floor. "They answered the questions?" I whispered. "Yes. They knew the name of your high school mascot and the model of your first car. They failed on the 3rd question, which asks for your favorite vacation spot." I let out a shaky breath. I had changed that one to Mars just 48 hours ago. If I hadn't— "Ms. Monroe," the agent said, "this suggests the person trying to access your account has significant personal knowledge of you. Do you want to flag this as fraud?" "Yes," I said. "Flag it, lock it down. No one gets in without a verbal passphrase." I hung up and called Nora immediately. "They are trying to get in," I told her. "They tried to reset my password. They knew the answers. Nora, they knew about the Honda Civic I drove when I was 16. "It has started," Nora said grimly. "They are not trying to negotiate anymore. They are trying to commandeer your assets. This is technically attempted wire fraud. Talia, we need to document this." "How?" I asked. "It's just internet traffic." "You file a report with the Internet Crime Complaint Center," Nora instructed. "You save that phishing email as a PDF, including the header information. You get a case number from the bank for the fraud attempt. We are building a paper trail. If they want to play hacker, we are going to treat them like criminals. I spent the rest of the afternoon filing reports. It felt surreal. I was reporting my own mother to the federal government, but every time I felt a twinge of guilt. I looked at that fake email. Bank of America. That wasn't an accident. That was a calculated trap designed to steal my inheritance. I realized I couldn't just rely on digital walls. If they were willing to spoof a bank, what else were they willing to do? I went to the hardware store. I bought a video doorbell and a small battery-operated stick-up camera. I spent 2 hours installing them. I put the doorbell on my front door, obviously, but the second camera, I hid. I mounted it on the underside of the staircase railing, pointed directly at the cluster of mailboxes for my building. My apartment was on the second floor of a townhouse complex, and the mailboxes were in a communal row at the bottom of the stairs. I wasn't doing this because I was crazy. I was doing it because Nora had warned me. If they can't get into your bank online, they will try to intercept your mail. New cards, statements, tax documents. That night, I sat in the dark, watching the live feed from the cameras on my iPad. The glowing green light was the only thing keeping me company. I felt isolated. I felt like I was the only person in the world dealing with this level of betrayal. I needed to know if I was losing my mind. I went online. I found a forum for legal advice and estate disputes. I created a throwaway account, changing the names and locations, and typed out my story. I titled it, "My Estranged Family is Trying to Access My Inheritance, and I Think They Spoofed My Bank." I posted it and went to make tea. When I came back 20 minutes later, there were already 30 comments. I expected people to tell me to calm down. I expected them to say family is complicated. Instead, the comments were a chorus of alarm bells. "This is not drama," one user wrote. "This is a crime in progress. Lock your credit now." "OP, you are underreacting," another said. "This is textbook financial abuse. If they have your SSN, you are in danger. Lawyer up and do not talk to them." "My ex-husband did this." A third comment read, "It ended with him taking out credit cards in my name. This isn't a family dispute. It is a robbery." Reading those words made me feel less alone, but infinitely more terrified. It validated the cold knot in my gut. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being hunted. I sat there, scrolling through the advice, feeling the weight of the realization. My mother, the woman who had packed my lunchboxes, who had taught me to tie my shoes, was now a threat actor. She wasn't just greedy. She was using the intimacy of our past as a weapon to destroy my future. She was weaponizing my childhood. Every memory she had of me was now just a data point she could use to crack a security question. I closed my laptop. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. I was exhausted, but my brain was wired, waiting for the next attack. I tried to close my eyes. I told myself they had failed. I told myself the firewall held. I told myself they would get scared and back off. Then, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It wasn't a text. It was a notification from the security app. Motion detected. Mailbox camera. I froze. It was 3 in the morning. The mail carrier didn't come at 3 in the morning. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling as I unlocked the screen. I tapped the notification. The video feed loaded, buffering for a split second that felt like a lifetime. And then the image cleared. It was grainy, shot in infrared black and white, but the face was unmistakable. Every piece of the puzzle slammed together. The paranoia, the warnings, the gut feelings, they were all right. I wasn't looking at a stranger. I was looking at the reason I would never sleep soundly again. It was a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of midweek drag where the Florida humidity presses against the windows and makes the air conditioning work overtime. I was sitting at my dual monitor setup, deep in a code deployment meeting for Blue Hollow Systems. My headset was on, and my boss, Sarah, was droning on about server latency in the Pacific Northwest. On my left screen, lines of code scrolled by. On my right screen, I had my security dashboard open. It had become my new coworker, A silent partner I checked every 4 minutes. At 2:14 in the afternoon, the silence broke. It started with a soft chime from my iPad propped up against a stack of books. Motion detected. Front yard. I muted my microphone instantly. I didn't even look at the code anymore. I tapped the notification. The feed loaded in high definition. A gray sedan was idling just beyond the fire hydrant, right in the blind spot of the street lamp, but perfectly framed by my new 4K lens. I knew that car. I knew the dent on the rear bumper from when Graham backed into a pylon 3 years ago. It was them. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Why are they here? Before I could answer that, a second notification popped up. Motion detected. Mailbox cluster. I swiped to the second camera feed, the one hidden under the staircase railing. There was Denise. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a scarf. Despite it being 80 degrees outside, she was standing in front of the metal bank of mailboxes, her body angled to block the view from the street. She wasn't opening a box. She was just standing there, her phone pressed hard against her ear, her head swiveling left and right like a lookout in a bank heist movie. I watched, frozen. What were they doing? They didn't have a key to my mailbox. They couldn't get in physically. Then, the third chime sounded. This one didn't come from the security system. It came from my phone, lying face up on the desk. It was a push notification from my banking app. Security alert. Unknown device attempting to access your account via biometric bypass. The world seemed to slow down. I looked at the timestamps. The camera showed Graham in the driver's seat of the sedan. I could see through the windshield because of the angle of the sun. He wasn't driving. He had a laptop open on his lap, the screen glowing blue against his chest. He was typing furiously. I looked at the clock on my computer. 2:14 and 30 seconds. I looked at the bank alert. 2:14 and 32 seconds. They were synced. I didn't scream. I didn't run to the window to bang on the glass. A cold, mechanical clarity took over. I was recording the meeting for work, but I minimized that window. I opened my screen recording software, OBS Studio, a tool I used for tech demos, and set it to capture my entire desktop. Okay, I whispered to the empty room. You want to play? Let's get you on tape. I pulled up the live feed of the car on one half of the screen. I pulled up the live feed of the mailbox on the quarter screen, and on the last quarter, I opened the bank security log in a browser window. I watched Graham type. He hit the enter key with an aggressive jab of his index finger. Instantly, the browser window on my screen refreshed. Failed login attempt. Invalid answer to security question. I watched Denise at the mailbox. She was speaking rapidly into the phone. She wasn't just listening. She was reading something. She looked down at a piece of paper in her hand, then back to the phone. I realized what was happening. They weren't just guessing. They were trying to use my proximity to trick the bank's security system. They were parked 50 feet from my router. If they could spoof my Wi-Fi signal, or even just ping off the same cell tower, the bank's system might think the request was coming from home. And Denise? She was checking the mail because they had triggered a send verification code via post request days ago and timed their arrival for when the mail carrier usually dropped off the post. They were trying to intercept a physical code while digitally breaking down the front door. I grabbed my phone and dialed the fraud department direct line I had been given. This is Talia Monroe, I said the second the agent picked up. I have an active intrusion in progress. Do not lock the account yet. I need the logs first. Ma'am? The agent sounded confused. I said, give me the metadata, I snapped, my eyes glued to the screen. Someone is trying to access my account. I have them on video. I need you to tell me the device ID and the IP address of the request that just hit your server 10 seconds ago. I can see the attempt, the agent stammered. It is coming from a Windows device, running a spoofing tool. Time? I asked. 2:15 p.m., Eastern Standard Time. On my screen. Graham slammed his hand against the steering wheel. He looked at his phone, then typed again. Another attempt just now, the agent said. 2:16 p.m. Got him, I whispered. I saved the recording. I took screenshots of the timestamps. I exported the video clip of Denise lurking by the mailboxes. I had the trinity of evidence: the physical presence, the digital footprint, and the simultaneous action. I waited until Graham started the car. He looked furious. He threw the laptop onto the passenger seat. Denise ran from the mailboxes, jumping into the back seat like a criminal fleeing the scene. The gray sedan peeled away, running the stop sign at the end of the block. I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for a lifetime. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline. I called Nora. I didn't even say hello. I just sent her the file. "Watch this," I said. There was silence on the line for 3 minutes while she watched the video. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. The warm, maternal tone she sometimes used was gone. This was the voice of a shark smelling blood in the water. "This is not a civil dispute anymore. Talia," Nora said, "this is conspiracy to commit wire fraud. This is unauthorized access to a protected computer system. And because they used a car and a phone, it is technically a federal issue." "I have the logs," I said. The timestamps match the video down to the second. "Print them," Nora commanded. "We are going to the precinct. Today, we are not waiting for a court date. We are filing a criminal complaint." I spent the next 2 hours assembling the dossier. I printed the photos of Graham in the car. I printed the bank logs. I put them side by side, drawing red lines connecting the time he hit enter to the time the bank recorded the attack. It was undeniable. It was perfect. I drove to the police station with the folder on the passenger seat. I felt a grim satisfaction. They wanted a fight? They wanted to use the law to bully me? I was about to drop a felony charge on their heads. I sat down with a detective, a tired-looking man who seemed skeptical until I opened the laptop and played the split-screen video. I saw his eyebrows go up when he saw the synchronization. He took my statement. He took the evidence. He gave me a case number. "We will look into this," he said. "With this kind of documentation, it is pretty clear-cut." I walked out of the station feeling lighter than I had in months. I had done it. I had caught them red-handed. I had the weapon my father had promised me. The truth, documented and verified. I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat down to watch the footage one more time. I wanted to relish the moment Graham failed. I wanted to see Denise's panic. I opened the video file. I zoomed in on the car. There was Graham, typing. There was the laptop. Then, I zoomed in on the mailbox camera. I wanted to see what Denise was holding. I scrubbed the video frame by frame. Denise was holding her phone to her ear. Her lips were moving. She was clearly talking to someone. I paused the video. I looked at the timestamp. 2:14 and 30 seconds. Then I looked at the car. Graham was not on the phone. His phone was on the dashboard. Dark. He was typing with both hands. My blood ran cold. If Denise was talking to someone, and Graham wasn't on the phone, then who was Denise talking to? I rewound the bank log conversation in my head. The agent had said something I missed in the heat of the moment. Running an emulation software. Graham barely knew how to convert a PDF. He typed with 2 fingers. He didn't know what an emulator was. He was just the hands on the keyboard. I zoomed in on Denise's phone screen. The resolution was grainy, but I could see it was a call in progress. The timer on her screen showed the call had been active for 10 minutes. She wasn't looking out for the mail carrier. She was relaying instructions. She was talking to the pilot. Graham was just the passenger. There was a third person, someone who knew the technical side, someone who was guiding them through the breach, telling Graham what to type, telling Denise when to check for the code. I lowered the wine glass, the feeling of victory evaporating instantly. I hadn't caught the mastermind. I had just caught the henchman. And whoever was on the other end of that phone line, whoever was directing my mother and stepfather like puppets, was still out there. And unlike them, this person knew exactly what they were doing. The next morning, the air in Nora's office felt different. It was no longer the quiet sanctuary of estate planning. It was a war room. The mahogany desk was covered in printouts of server logs, maps of cell tower pings, and the dossier I had compiled from the police station. Nora stood by the window, holding a sheet of paper up to the light. She looked less like a lawyer and more like a detective who had just found the smoking gun. "You were right," she said, turning to face me. "Graham is not smart enough to run an emulator, and Denise still types with one finger, but looking at these logs, we missed something the first time because we were too focused on the car." She laid the paper down in front of me. It was a traceroute of the IP addresses that had attempted to breach my bank account. "Here," she pointed. 2:15 in the afternoon. This attempt came from the mobile hotspot in Graham's car outside your apartment. That matches the video." She slid her finger down the page. "But look at this one. 2:10 in the afternoon. 5 minutes before they arrived at your house. A login attempt from a static IP address, desktop computer, high-speed fiber connection." I looked at the location data. "Fern Park," I read aloud. "That is 20 minutes away from my apartment, and 30 minutes away from where Denise and Graham live." "Exactly," Nora said. "Someone was testing the doors from a remote location before Graham and Denise arrived on site to try the physical bypass. They were coordinating." My mind flashed back to the lunch at the restaurant. I remembered the suffocating tension, the way my mother had glared at me, but then I remembered something else. I remembered Mr. Harlan, the sweaty lawyer they had hired. Throughout the entire meeting, he hadn't been looking at his notes. He had been looking at his phone, tapping out messages under the table, his eyes darting back and forth as if he were waiting for permission to speak. "Harlan," I said. "He was texting someone during the meeting. I thought he was just nervous, but he was getting coaching." Nora nodded. "Harlan is a slip-and-fall attorney. He does not know trust law. He was just a warm body in a suit, but the person texting him, and the person sitting at a desktop in Fern Park trying to crack your password? That is the same person." We needed a name. We turned our attention to the fake email, the Banco Famerica phishing attempt. Most people think the internet is anonymous, but my father taught me that everything costs money, and money leaves a trail. The domain had been registered 3 days ago. Whoever registered it had used a privacy proxy service to hide their name, but they had made a mistake. They had used a cheap, third-tier registrar that didn't scrub the billing contact from the invoice receipt sent to the recovery email. Nora's paralegal, a quiet genius named David, had spent the morning running a script to ping the recovery address. It was a generic Gmail account, but it was linked to a public Venmo profile used for freelance payments. David turned his laptop screen toward us. "Does the name Kevin Rydell mean anything to you?" I stared at the screen. The profile picture was a guy in his late 20s, wearing a headset, looking bored. "Kevin," I whispered. The name tasted like bile. "He is the IT guy for Graham's real estate office. He fixes their printers and sets up their Wi-Fi." The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. We weren't dealing with a dark web criminal syndicate. We weren't dealing with a Russian hacker group. We were dealing with the guy who rebooted Graham's router when the internet was slow. "He is a freelancer," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Graham probably paid him $500 to help recover a lost family password. That is how they framed it. They didn't tell him it was a heist, or maybe they did, and he just didn't care." "It makes sense," Nora said, her voice hard. "Kevin sets up the spoofing site. Kevin registers the domain. Kevin runs the emulator from his home office in Fern Park. He guides Graham, who barely knows how to use a mouse, through the process while they sit outside your house to trick the location sensors." I felt a wave of nausea. It was so banal. It was so pathetic. And yet, it was lethal. "But Nora," I said, looking at the logs again, "Kevin is just a tech guy. He doesn't know me. How did he get past the first 2 security questions? He knew the make of my first car. He knew my high school mascot." Nora looked at me with deep sorrow. "Kevin didn't know those things. Talia, your mother did." The room went silent. That was the twist. That was the knife in the gut. The hacking wasn't sophisticated code breaking. It was data entry. My mother had sat down with this stranger, this Kevin. And she had fed him my life. She had given him the name of the street where I learned to ride a bike. She had given him the name of the dog I cried over when he died. She had taken the intimate, precious details of my childhood and turned them into an answer key for a stranger to loot my future. I felt violated in a way that had nothing to do with money. It was a strip mining of my history. They are weaponizing your memories, Nora said quietly. That is their real power, not the technology, the intimacy. Just then, my phone buzzed on the desk. It was Denise. I stared at the preview. I just want you to be reasonable. Talia, Mom only wants you to think about the big picture. We can stop all this if you just come back to the table. It was gaslighting in its purest form. She was actively trying to break into my bank account, actively committing felonies, and simultaneously texting me to say she was the peacemaker. She wanted me to doubt my own reality. She wanted me to think I was the one making a scene. She thinks she is still in control, I said, looking at the text. She thinks because the bank locked the account. They just hit a speed bump. She doesn't know we have the logs. She doesn't know we know about Kevin. Nora stood up and walked to the whiteboard. She picked up a red marker. Then we use that arrogance, she said. If we arrest them now, they will claim ignorance. Graham will say he was just working in his car. Denise will say she was just checking mail. They will throw Kevin under the bus, and Kevin will say he was hired to do a legitimate recovery job. It will be messy. So what do? I asked. We don't just defend anymore, Nora said, uncapping the marker. We attack. We give them exactly what they want, a door. She drew a square on the board. We are going to open a bait account, Nora explained. I have a contact in the fraud department at your bank who is already briefed on the situation. We are going to create a sub-account under your profile. We will label it Inheritance Trust Distribution. We will put a pending balance in it, a large one, something that will make them drool. And then? And then, Nora smiled, a shark-like grin. We are going to lower the drawbridge. We are going to reset the security questions for that specific sub-account to things they definitely know, things Kevin can type in without guessing. We are letting them in? I asked, horrified. We are letting them walk into a cage, Nora corrected. The moment they access that account, the bank's forensic team will be recording every keystroke. We will have proof that they didn't just attempt to access it, but that they successfully entered and tried to move funds. That moves the charge from attempted fraud to aggravated identity theft and grand larceny. It was a terrifying plan. It required me to expose myself, to voluntarily step back into the crosshairs. How do they find out about the account? I asked. You are going to tell them, Nora said, or rather, you are going to tell Harlan. 10 minutes later, I drafted an email to Mr. Harlan. I wrote it to sound exhausted, beaten. I wrote that I was tired of the fighting, that I had authorized the bank to create a segregated viewing account so the family could see the assets were safe, hoping this would calm everyone down. I included a link. I pressed send. The trap was set. We waited. The afternoon dragged on. I sat in Nora's office, watching the monitor the bank specialist had shared with us via a secure link. It showed the login page for the dummy account. At 4:30 in the afternoon, the cursor on the screen blinked. Someone was there. Here we go, Nora whispered. The user typed in my username. Then, they clicked Forgot Password. The security questions popped up. Question 1. What is the name of your paternal grandfather? Denise knew that. My father's dad, Arthur. The cursor hesitated, then typed, Arthur. Correct. Question 2. In what city were you born? St. Petersburg. The typing was faster this time, confident. St. Petersburg. Correct. Question 3. What was the year of your high school graduation? 2014. Correct. The screen flashed green. Password reset. Successful. I held my breath. They were in. They had bypassed the wall because I had given them the keys, and they were too greedy to ask why the lock was suddenly so easy to pick. The screen changed to the account dashboard. There it was, the inheritance trust distribution account. The balance I had faked showed $450,000. I saw the mouse cursor tremble. I could almost feel their excitement through the screen. I could imagine Denise grabbing Graham's arm, pointing, seeing the number she had been chasing for weeks. The mouse moved to the transfer funds button. "Do it," I whispered. "Press it." If they pressed it, they were finished. If they tried to move a single penny, the federal trap would snap shut. The cursor hovered. Then, the typing started. They were entering a routing number. I recognized it immediately. It wasn't the family trust account they had pitched at the restaurant. It was a personal joint checking account held by Graham and Denise at a credit union. They weren't moving the money to a trust. They were stealing it, straight into their pockets. They entered the amount, $450,000. They hit submit. On the screen, a spinning wheel appeared, processing transaction. In reality, there was no money. In reality, the bank's fraud team was capturing the IP address, Fern Park, the MAC address of Kevin's computer, and the destination account number that tied everything directly to Denise and Graham. The screen flashed a confirmation message. Transaction pending review. Reference number 9982. "Got them," Nora said, leaning back in her chair. "That is the ball game." I stared at the screen. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a deep, hollowing sadness. Up until that final click, a tiny, foolish part of me had hoped they would stop. I hoped they would see the money and just be relieved I had it. But they didn't want me to be safe. They wanted the money. They had just tried to drain the entire account in a single transaction. They had left me with zero. "They really did it," I said softly. "They really tried to take it all." "Yes," Nora said, her voice gentle but firm. "And now, we have the evidence to make sure they never take anything from anyone ever again." Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Denise. "Thank you for finally being sensible. Talia, we will handle it from here." I looked at the message. She thought she had won. She thought the money was on its way. She had no idea that the only thing on its way was a team of officers with a warrant. I typed back 2 words. "You're welcome." It was the last thing I would ever say to her as a daughter. The next time I spoke to her, it would be as a witness for the prosecution. The digital trap was set. But Nora insisted we needed one final layer of cement to ensure the door locked behind them for good. We had the unauthorized access logs from the fake account. But defense attorneys are slippery. They could argue it was a misunderstanding, or that they thought they had permission. We needed proof of malicious intent. We needed to hear them say, in their own words, that they were stealing. The bank's fraud department, now fully briefed and treating this as an active investigation, set up an advanced monitoring protocol on my profile. They called it a silent alarm. It meant that the moment anyone other than me, verified by my specific device ID, touched the login page, a team in Charlotte would be watching in real time. Nora told me to bait the hook one last time. I went to Instagram. I knew Denise checked my profile daily, analyzing my life for clues she could use against me. I arranged a photo that looked casual. A picture of my laptop and a coffee cup on my balcony with the sunset in the background. But I carefully positioned a sticky note on the edge of the keyboard. On it, I had written a sequence of 6 numbers and the words, "Authorization code for transfer." It was fake. The numbers were random. But to a desperate woman trying to drain an account she believed contained nearly $500,000, it looked like the missing key. I posted it to my story with the caption, "Finally getting everything sorted out." I waited. It did not take long. Greed, I was learning, is the most predictable force in the universe. At 8 in the evening, my security system chimed. I pulled up the feed. The gray sedan was back, but this time it wasn't parked in front of my building. It was parked down the block, near the community center guest lot, presumably trying to avoid my cameras. But my new long-range lens picked them up clearly. I zoomed in. The interior light of the car was on. Graham was in the driver's seat, slamming his hand against the dashboard. He looked sweaty and frantic. Through the high-definition audio pickup I had installed near the street, I caught a snippet of his voice through the open window. "Hurry up," he hissed. "Do it before she changes the code." He wasn't acting like a concerned father. He was acting like a getaway driver. Inside my apartment, my iPad lit up. The bank's dashboard showed a login attempt. User entering 6-digit code. They were using the number from the sticky note. The system rejected it, of course, because it was nonsense. Invalid code. Access denied. On the camera feed, Graham threw his head back against the seat. Denise, sitting in the passenger seat this time, was frantically typing on her phone. Then my phone rang. The screen displayed unknown caller. I looked at Nora, who was sitting across from me at my dining table. She nodded. I did not answer. I let it ring. The phone vibrated 4 times, 5 times, then stopped. A notification appeared. New voicemail. I waited a minute to ensure the connection was severed on their end. Then I tapped play, putting it on speaker so Nora could hear. Usually, a voicemail from a wrong number is 3 seconds of silence. This recording was 45 seconds long. Talia? It was Denise's voice. She sounded breathless, high-pitched. Talia, pick up the phone. We know you are there. She waited. She must have thought I was screening the call. Then, there was a rustling sound, a muffled thud, like the phone being lowered into a lap, but not hung up. And then, the gold mine. She is not picking up, Denise said. Her voice was distant but distinct. She was talking to Graham. The code isn't working. She must have set it to expire. Try it again, Graham's voice growled in the background. Use the IT guy's bypass. I am trying, Denise snapped. God, if we could just get in once, just one time to move the funds to the offshore account, and it is done. We just need to finish it before the lawyers see the transaction. Call Kevin, Graham said. Tell him to force the entry. Then, the recording ended with a sharp click. Nora let out a long, low whistle. That, she said, leaning back in her chair with a look of supreme satisfaction, is what we call a confession. She immediately exported the audio file. She synced it with the bank's security log showing the failed attempt at the exact moment Denise mentioned the code not working. She synced it with the video of them in the car. It was a perfect trifecta of evidence: motive, method, and opportunity. They just admitted to trying to move funds to an offshore account, Nora said, typing furiously on her laptop. That takes this out of family dispute territory entirely. That is money laundering intent. And mentioning Kevin? They just gave us our witness. The next morning, the dominoes began to fall with terrifying speed. Nora contacted the district attorney's office with the package. They did not need to raid a compound. They just needed to make one phone call. They called Kevin Rydell. Nora was on the line when the detective spoke to him. Apparently, the moment the police mentioned federal wire fraud conspiracy and serving time for clients, Kevin folded faster than a cheap card table. He wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was a 26-year-old freelancer who thought he was doing a slightly gray area data recovery job for a local businessman. When he found out he was being framed as the technical lead on a grand larceny scheme, he sent over everything. He sent the chat logs where Graham asked him to mask the IP address. He sent the emails where Denise provided my social security number and the answers to my security questions. He sent the Venmo receipts for the rush fee. He pinned the entire operation on them to save himself. By noon, the atmosphere in the Kincaid house must have been suffocating. I didn't need a camera to know that the walls were closing in. I received a text from Kayla, my stepsister. We hadn't spoken in 3 years. Talia, what is going on? Mom is freaking out. She is throwing things. Graham is on the phone with his bank yelling about frozen assets. Are we in trouble? I stared at the message. Kayla and Jordan were spoiled. Yes, they were entitled, but they weren't criminals. They were just the collateral damage of 2 people who thought the world owed them a living. I replied carefully, I cannot discuss details, but if you have nothing to do with their finances, you need to stay out of the room. Do not sign anything they give you. It was the only mercy I could offer. They were realizing that their parents weren't the invincible monarchs of the family. They were desperate people dragging the whole house down into a sinkhole of their own making. But Denise was not done. She had one card left to play, the one she always used when logic and law failed her. Social pressure. At 4 in the afternoon, my phone started buzzing with notifications. Not from the bank, from family. Aunts I hadn't seen since Christmas 5 years ago. Cousins who lived in Ohio. My father's older sister, Aunt Martha. Denise had sent a mass email, a long, rambling, hysterical manifesto. I opened it. The subject line was, "Pray for our family. Talia is destroying us." The text was a masterclass in manipulation. She claimed I had suffered a mental break after Dad's death. She claimed I was confused, paranoid, and holding the family inheritance hostage out of spite. She claimed I had hired a predatory lawyer to sue them for trying to help me manage the estate. She omitted the phishing, the cameras, the fake accounts. She painted herself as the martyr mother trying to save her daughter from herself. "Please," she wrote at the end, "call Talia. Tell her to stop this madness before she ruins her own future. We just want to love her." My phone rang. It was Aunt Martha. "Talia," Martha's voice was stern. "I just got this email from your mother. Is it true? Are you suing her? She says you are keeping money that belongs to your brother and sister." I felt a flash of the old shame, the reflex to explain, to defend, to apologize. Then I remembered the voicemail. Just need to get in once to finish it. "Aunt Martha," I said, my voice steady, "I am going to send you one file. Please listen to it. And then, if you still want to ask me questions, call me back." I forwarded her the voicemail of Denise and Graham in the car. I did the same for every cousin, every aunt, every family friend who reached out. I didn't argue. I didn't write a counter-manifesto. I just sent the audio file and the police report number. The silence that followed was deafening. One by one, the flying monkeys stopped flying. They heard the greed in Denise's voice. They heard the cruelty. They heard the undeniable sound of a crime being committed. Denise's attempt to turn the family against me had backfired spectacularly. She had handed them the microphone, expecting them to amplify her lies. But instead, I used it to broadcast her confession. At 6 in the evening, I got one final notification. It wasn't a text or an email. It was an automated alert from the county clerk of courts. Case filed, State of Florida versus Denise Kincaid and Graham Kincaid. Charges: attempted grand larceny, identity theft, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. I put my phone down on the coffee table. The apartment was quiet. The sun had gone down, leaving the room in shadows. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The gray sedan was gone. The mailbox was empty. The cameras watched nothing but the empty pavement. I thought I would feel happy. I thought I would feel like pumping my fist in the air. But revenge, real revenge, is not like the movies. It is not a triumphant fanfare. It is just the heavy, exhausting work of taking out the trash. I was not doing this to hurt them. I was doing it to stop them. Nora called me 10 minutes later. "They have been served," she said. "The arraignment is set for Tuesday. They are going to need bail money, but since their assets are frozen pending the investigation, they are going to have a very hard time finding it." "What happens now?" I asked. Now," Nora said. "We prepare for court. They will plead not guilty. They will try to say the recording was illegal. It wasn't. You didn't answer the phone. They left a voicemail. They will try to say Kevin is lying. They will struggle." "I am ready," I said, and I meant it. "Talia," Nora added, her voice softening, "you know this means the end of the relationship, right? Once we walk into that courtroom, there is no going back to Sunday dinners." I looked at the empty spot on the shelf where my father's picture sat. "There haven't been Sunday dinners for a long time. Nora," I said, "there have just been feeding frenzies. I am just closing the kitchen." I hung up. I went to the fridge and poured a glass of water. I drank it standing up in the middle of my kitchen, feeling the cool liquid wash away the taste of the last few days. My mother had tried to trap me in a restaurant. She had tried to trap me in a contract. She had tried to trap me in guilt. But in her arrogance, she had walked right into the only trap she couldn't talk her way out of. She had walked into the truth, and the truth, as my father always said, is the only thing that doesn't need a lawyer to defend it. It just needs to be heard. The Orange County Courthouse in downtown Orlando is a fortress of glass and concrete, designed to make you feel small. 6 weeks ago, walking into a building like this would have made my knees shake. I would have felt like the little girl who hid in her room while her parents fought over credit card bills. But as I walked through the metal detectors that Tuesday morning, I did not feel small. I felt heavy. But it was the good kind of heavy. It was the weight of a briefcase filled with 3 inches of printed server logs, sworn affidavits, and a USB drive that contained the death of my relationship with my mother. I looked over at Nora Vance. She was walking beside me with a stride that cut through the humidity of the Florida morning. She didn't look like a lawyer who was about to argue a family dispute. She looked like a surgeon scrubbing in for an amputation. "Remember," Nora said as we approached courtroom 4B, "they are going to try to make this emotional. They are going to cry. They are going to talk about intent and love. We do not do emotion today. We do math. We do timestamps. We do statutes." I nodded. "I am ready." We pushed through the double doors. Denise and Graham were already seated at the defense table. My mother had clearly spent hours curating her appearance for this specific performance. Gone were the flashy designer logos and the sharp jewelry she usually wore to intimidate waitstaff. She was wearing a soft, pastel cardigan and a modest skirt. Her hair was pulled back loosely, and she held a crumpled tissue in her hand, dabbing at eyes that looked red-rimmed. She looked like the victim. She looked like a confused, heartbroken mother who couldn't understand why her ungrateful daughter had dragged her into this cold, legal nightmare. Graham sat next to her, but he couldn't pull off the act as well. He was wearing a suit that was too gray, too dull, and his leg was bouncing under the table with a nervous, staccato rhythm. He kept checking his watch, then looking at the door, then checking his watch again. He looked like a man who realized he had bet his house on a bad hand of poker. Their lawyer, a court-appointed defense attorney named Mr. Sterling, Harlan had wisely recused himself the moment the criminal charges dropped, stood up as the judge entered. Judge Holloway was a stern woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose and a reputation for having zero patience for theatrics. "Mr. Sterling opened with exactly the narrative we expected. "Your Honor," he began, his voice dripping with faux sympathy, "this is a tragic misunderstanding. We have here a family grieving the loss of a father. My clients, out of concern for the mental state of the plaintiff, attempted to secure assets they believed were being mismanaged. Was their method unorthodox? Perhaps. But was it criminal? Absolutely not. This is a family matter that belongs in therapy, not in criminal court." I watched Denise wipe a tear from her cheek. It was a perfect single tear. I wondered if she had practiced it in the rearview mirror. Then it was Nora's turn. She didn't use adjectives. She didn't use sympathy. She walked to the podium and laid out the timeline like she was building a wall. Brick by undeniable brick. "On the 16th of last month," Nora stated, "the defendants lured the plaintiff to a meeting under false pretenses to force the signing of an irrevocable trust. When that failed, they did not seek therapy. They sought a hacker." Nora moved through the evidence with terrifying speed. She displayed the fake Bank of America email. She showed the domain registration receipts. She showed the server logs from the bank that tracked the unauthorized attempts to reset my password. "This was not an emotional reaction," Nora said, pointing to the screen where the IP addresses were projected. "This was a coordinated, multi-stage cyber attack. They utilized a spoofed domain. They utilized an emulation software to mask their device fingerprint. And they utilized a third party to bypass federal banking security protocols." That was the cue for our first witness. The bailiff called Kevin Rydell to the stand. Kevin looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He wore a button-down shirt that was wrinkled at the collar, and he refused to look at the defense table. He sat in the witness box, hunched over, looking like he wanted to disappear. "Mr. Rydell," Nora asked, "what was your understanding of the job you were hired to do by Graham Kincaid?" "He told me his stepdaughter had locked herself out of her inheritance account," Kevin mumbled into the microphone. "He said she was having a mental breakdown, and they needed to secure the funds before she lost them. He asked me to help them recover the password." "And did you recover the password?" Nora asked. "No," Kevin said. "We reset it. I used the security questions." "How did you know the answers to the security questions, Mr. Rydell? Did you know the plaintiff's high school mascot? Did you know the make of her first car?" "No," Kevin said, shaking his head. "Mrs. Kincaid gave them to me. She had a list. She sat next to me while I typed them in." A murmur went through the courtroom. I saw Judge Holloway look over her glasses at Denise. Denise stiffened, her tissue pausing mid-dab. "So," Nora continued, "you are testifying that Denise Kincaid provided the personal identification data used to breach a federally insured bank account without the account holder's permission?" "Yes," Kevin said, "and Graham paid me $500 via Venmo for the rush job. I have the receipt." Mr. Sterling tried to cross-examine Kevin, tried to paint him as an incompetent freelancer who misunderstood instructions, but the damage was done. The misunderstanding defense was crumbling under the weight of the Venmo transaction. You don't pay a freelancer a rush fee to help a family member unless you are trying to beat a clock. Then came the audio. Nora played the voicemail. The courtroom was silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning. My mother's voice rang out, clear and sharp, stripped of the grieving widow tone she was using today. "Just need to get in once to finish it. Do it before she changes the code." It echoed off the wood paneling. It sounded ugly. It sounded like greed. I looked at Graham. He had stopped bouncing his leg. He was staring at the table, his face pale. He knew what that recording meant. It meant intent. It meant conspiracy. It meant his commercial real estate license, which required a clean record regarding financial crimes, was about to go up in smoke. But Denise wasn't done. When she took the stand, she tried to pivot. "I was scared for her," Denise cried, turning to the judge. "Talia has been so distant since Marcus died. She stopped talking to us. She was hoarding all that money, and I just wanted to make sure it was safe. A mother protects her children. Your Honor, I didn't steal anything. I was trying to put it in a trust." "A trust controlled by you," Nora interjected from the plaintiff's table. "Is that correct?" "Well, someone has to manage it," Denise snapped, her mask slipping for a split second. "Talia isn't ready for that kind of responsibility. She rents an apartment. She drives a used car. She doesn't know how to handle wealth." "Mrs. Kincaid," Nora said, walking closer to the witness stand, "you claim you were acting as a concerned parent, but on the night of the 24th, did you or did you not attempt to transfer $450,000 from the plaintiff's account to a joint checking account held solely by you and your husband?" Denise froze. She opened her mouth, then closed it. We were going to hold it there temporarily," she stammered. "Is your name on the plaintiff's account?" Nora asked. "No, but—" "Did you have power of attorney?" "I am her mother." "That is not a legal standing. Mrs. Kincaid," Nora said, her voice like a whip. "Did you have a legal reason to access that account?" Denise looked at Mr. Sterling. He looked down at his papers. He couldn't help her. "No," Denise whispered. "No further questions," Nora said. Then it was my turn. Walking to the witness stand felt like walking underwater. I could feel their eyes on me. Graham's glare, Denise's pleading, desperate stare. I swore to tell the truth, and for the first time in my life, I did. Not the polite truth I used to tell at Thanksgiving to keep the peace. The real truth. "Ms. Monroe," Mr. Sterling asked me on cross-examination, trying to salvage his case, "do you hate your mother?" The question hung in the air. I looked at Denise. I remembered her brushing my hair before school. I remembered her teaching me how to make pancakes. But I also remembered the pen on the table at the restaurant. I remembered the fake email. I remembered the camera footage of her lurking by my mailbox like a thief. No, I said quietly. I do not hate her. Hate requires energy. I am just exhausted. Exhausted by what? Sterling pressed. Exhausted by being an investment vehicle instead of a daughter, I said. My voice was steady, projecting to the back of the room. My father left me that money so I would be safe. He knew that if I wasn't safe, I would never be able to say no to them. And he was right. They didn't break into my account because they were worried about my mental health. They broke in because I finally said no. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, this isn't a family dispute. If a stranger had done this, if a stranger had spoofed my bank and stolen my identity, we wouldn't be talking about my feelings. We would be talking about the law. The fact that she gave birth to me doesn't give her the right to rob me. The courtroom went silent. I saw Graham flinch. I saw the reality settle over them. They weren't fighting a daughter anymore. They were fighting a victim who had refused to be a victim. Judge Holloway nodded slowly. She made a note on her pad. The court will take a 15-minute recess to review the evidence logs before closing statements, the judge announced. She banged the gavel. As everyone stood up, Denise rushed toward the railing that separated the gallery from the well of the court. Talia, she hissed. Talia, please, you have to stop this. Graham will lose his license. We will lose the house. Is that what you want? To put your mother on the street? I stopped packing my bag. I looked at her. You have a house, Mom, I said. You have a nice house. You just can't afford it. That is not my fault. I am your mother, she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. I gave you life. And you tried to sell it for $450,000, I replied. I turned my back on her and walked toward the exit doors. But as we walked into the hallway, Nora grabbed my arm. Her face was grim. They are going to plea, she said. Sterling is talking to the prosecutor right now. They are going to offer a deal to drop the felony to a misdemeanor to save Graham's license. They are banking on the fact that the judge doesn't want to ruin a family over a failed attempt. So they get away with it? I asked, my heart sinking. They get a slap on the wrist? Not if we show them the last piece, Nora said. She pulled a folder from her briefcase that I hadn't seen before. It wasn't the bank logs. It wasn't the camera footage. I found this in the discovery files from the family trust document they tried to make you sign at the restaurant. Nora said, The judge hasn't seen the metadata on the original file yet. We saved it for rebuttal. What is it? I asked. The date of creation, Nora said. I looked at the paper she handed me. It was a forensic analysis of the Word document Mr. Harlan had drafted, the Family Asset Reallocation Agreement. The date of creation was November 12th. I froze. November 12th, I whispered. That was the day before Dad died. Exactly, Nora said. They didn't draft this because he died. They drafted it because they knew he was sick, or they suspected the end was coming, and they wanted to be ready to pounce the second he was gone. But look at the author metadata. I looked. The document wasn't created by Mr. Harlan. It was created by user D. Kincaid. She wrote it, I said, feeling the bile rise in my throat. She wrote her own payout contract while my father was still breathing. She planned this, Nora said. It wasn't desperation after the funeral. It was premeditation before the death, and that, she pointed to the courtroom doors, is what proves this wasn't a crime of passion. It was a business plan. The bailiff opened the door. All rise. Nora looked at me. Ready to finish this? I took the file from her hand. Let's go. We walked back inside. Denise was smiling at Graham, looking hopeful, probably thinking the plea deal was coming. She had no idea that we were about to turn the lights on in the last dark corner of her scheme. The play was over. The curtain was about to come down on her neck. The recess lasted exactly 20 minutes, but inside that courtroom, the air grew so heavy it felt like the oxygen was being siphoned out. Denise sat at the defense table, her hands clasped in a white-knuckled grip of prayer or panic. Graham stared straight ahead at the wood paneling, perhaps calculating the ruin of his career in real time. When Judge Holloway returned, she did not look at the lawyers. She did not look at the gallery. She looked directly at the defendants. She adjusted her glasses, opened the folder in front of her, and let the silence stretch for a long, agonizing moment. "I have reviewed the evidence," Judge Holloway began, her voice cutting through the room with the precision of a scalpel. "And I have reviewed the supplementary metadata provided by the plaintiff's counsel regarding the creation of the so-called asset reallocation agreement." She looked at Denise. "Mrs. Kincaid, your defense counsel has argued eloquently that your actions were born out of maternal concern. He has argued that this was a misunderstanding within a grieving family, a desperate attempt to protect a daughter who was not thinking clearly." Denise nodded eagerly, tears welling up again. She thought she saw a lifeline. "However," the judge continued, her tone dropping an octave, "the evidence tells a different story. You cannot claim to be protecting a vulnerable person when you draft a document to seize their assets 24 hours before the decedent has even passed away. That is not grief. That is predation." Denise's nod froze. "Furthermore," the judge said, holding up the server logs, "hiring a third-party technician to bypass federal banking security protocols is not a family dispute. It is a digital home invasion. You did not knock on your daughter's door. You tried to pick the lock in the middle of the night. The fact that you used her childhood memories, her first pet, her high school mascot, as the tools to break in makes this violation particularly egregious. You weaponized intimacy for profit." "Your Honor, please," Graham started to say, half standing. "Sit down, Mr. Kincaid," the judge snapped. "I am not finished." She turned her gaze to him. "Mr. Kincaid, you drove the getaway car. You paid the technician. You are listed as a co-beneficiary on the proposed trust. You are just as culpable." The judge looked down at her notes to deliver the sentence. It wasn't prison time. White-collar attempts rarely end in handcuffs for first-time offenders. But it was something far more painful for people like them. It was financial and social ruin. "I find the defendants guilty on the lesser, included charges of attempted identity theft and conspiracy to commit unauthorized computer access," the judge ruled. "However, given the malice demonstrated, I am imposing the maximum financial penalty allowed." She looked at them over her glasses. "You are ordered to pay full restitution for the plaintiff's legal fees, totaling $82,000. You are placed on probation for a period of 5 years, during which your financial assets will be subject to court-ordered monitoring. Any transaction over $500 must be reported." Then came the blow that made Graham audibly gasp. "Regarding Mr. Kincaid's real estate license," the judge said, "I am forwarding a copy of this judgment and the case file to the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation. A conspiracy conviction involving financial fraud is grounds for immediate revocation. You are a danger to any client whose assets you manage." Graham slumped in his chair, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. He knew what that meant. His career was over. The country club memberships, the leased luxury cars, the image of the successful businessman, it was all gone. But the judge had one final observation, a twist that I hadn't even fully appreciated until she said it aloud. "One last thing," Judge Holloway said, picking up the torn copy of the agreement from the evidence pile. "I read Article 4 of this document you tried to force the plaintiff to sign. You claimed it was a general fund to help the family. But the language here creates an irrevocable power of attorney granting Denise Kincaid total control over the principal, with no fiduciary duty to report spending to the beneficiary." The judge looked at Denise with genuine disgust. "If your daughter had signed this, Mrs. Kincaid, you could have legally drained every penny without her permission, and she would have had no recourse. This wasn't a safety net. It was a transfer of ownership. You didn't want to save her inheritance. You wanted to become the owner of it." Denise crumbled. Her face fell into her hands, and for the first time, the tears were real. She wasn't crying because she was sorry. She was crying because she had been seen. The mask was ripped off, and the ugly truth underneath was recorded in the court transcript for eternity. "Case closed," the judge said. The gavel banged, a sharp, wooden period at the end of a terrifying sentence. The courtroom began to clear. I looked over at the gallery. Kayla and Jordan were sitting in the back row. They looked stunned, pale, and young. They watched their parents arguing with Mr. Sterling, watched the bailiff hand Graham a stack of paperwork that signaled the end of his professional life. Kayla looked at me. I expected anger. I expected her to scream that I had ruined them. Instead, she just shook her head slowly. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and tapped Jordan on the shoulder. They didn't go to the defense table to comfort their parents. They turned around and walked out the back door. They were choosing survival. They were choosing to distance themselves from the blast radius. Nora packed up her briefcase. She looked at me and smiled. A genuine, warm smile. It is done, Talia. The restraining order is effective immediately. They cannot contact you. They cannot come within 500 feet of your home or workplace, and they cannot mention you on social media without violating probation. They are gone, I whispered, the reality finally sinking in. I walked out of the courthouse into the blinding Florida afternoon. The heat hit me, but it didn't feel oppressive anymore. It felt cleansing. I stood on the concrete steps and looked at the skyline. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel the urge to cheer. I just felt a profound, quiet lightness. It was the feeling of putting down a heavy backpack you have been carrying for 20 years. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from my bank. The real one. Deposit cleared. The final distribution of my father's estate had settled. It was safe. It was mine. I thought about the restaurant in Winter Park. I thought about the pen Denise had placed so carefully on the table. The trap she had set with such arrogance. She had invited me to a family meeting to steal my future. She thought she was the hunter. She never realized that by forcing me into that corner, she was actually handing me the weapon that would destroy her. She wanted a family meeting. Well, she got one. It just happened in a courtroom, and the judge presided over the minutes. I walked toward my car, alone but not lonely. For the first time since the funeral, I could hear my father's voice clearly in my head, not with sadness, but with pride. Family is supposed to protect your future. He had told me once, no one, not even the people who share your blood, has the right to steal it. I unlocked my car door and got in. I didn't look back at the courthouse. I put the car in drive and pulled out onto the road, heading toward a life that was finally, completely, and legally my own. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below sharing your city or country and tell me what you would have done if you were in Talia's shoes. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who need to hear that justice is possible.